Next up is our panel on food justice. And we have a lot of interest in this panel. We've been getting contacted by, and this, I just wanted to say why the RAP faculty really wanted to have this panel. We wanted to lay the context also of campus and community relationships, the relationship of USC to its neighbors and to the area, and to do that in the medium of food. So we have this fabulous panel helped assembled by my wonderful colleague David Sloan, who's been investigating and researching food issues around South LA for some time. So David, thank you for taking this leadership.
Thank you very much. Good morning. That's good. That's a good response. I would like to thank Annette, Gary, and Manuel for shepherding the development of the whole conference and for inviting us to talk about food and food justice and food equity. I don't know how many of you remember the rhetoric around the uprising, but I think one of the things that some people forget in the demand for justice, that part of that demand was for food justice. Particularly led by Community Coalition, there was a real desire to improve the food systems of South Central and the whole other communities around that were affected by the uprising. And so when Annette and I began to talk about this, I said that I thought food was an appropriate, if not essential issue to be talked about, because indeed it had been an important one for marginalized and underserved and vulnerable communities well before 1992. In the years that follow, not only did food insecurity continue, the inability of some people to get enough food, but also food insecurity expanded with the development of the extraordinary expansion of fast food and other bad foods, leading to overweight and obese populations facing adverse health outcomes, particularly disparate health outcomes. And this was created largely by the lack of resources, the lack of education, the lack of commitment by the structures and the elites and the political structures of our community. And so one of the things when we began to talk about the panel was how can we get some people who did exactly the opposite, who started creating here at USC within the gates, but outside of USC, tried to change that food system to make it more local, more healthier, and more community driven. And so I am very pleased to welcome my panelists today. We are going to go through a very brief set of introductions that they're going to do, and then we're going to turn to some of the key issues from our perspective of what we need to talk about from the past, the present, and the future. Why don't we start with Mark?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, David, for inviting me to the panel. My name is Mark Glassnak, and I'm the Project and Policy Director at the LA Neighborhood Land Trust. The Land Trust, if you're not familiar with us, advances equity and justice through community organizing, park development, and community garden development and long-term stewardship. Currently, we operate 4 food production sites in South LA, including a training program at Fremont High School, a communal garden across the street from King Hospital in Willowbrook, as well as 2 farm sites right around USC. We feel like our position in the food justice movement is unique in that we are property owners and we buy land, and the purpose of our work is to return land to the commons that would have otherwise been on kind of the speculative market. We feel like that is enormously not only difficult, but important because we see the history of South LA over the past 25 years. We've seen the overconcentration of liquor stores, of fast food restaurants. We've seen failed commitments from grocery stores like Vaughn's, who did commit to 15 grocery stores immediately following the '92 uprising, and nothing happened. So we feel like it is time for bold approaches, new thinking, but our work definitely stands on the shoulders of giants and movements before us, and we're very excited to be part of this work.
My name is Nancy Halpern Ibrahim. I'm the Executive Director of Esperanza Community Housing, which is a South Central-based organization in this neighborhood since 1989. We're an organization that started out of a community-based campaign to prevent the displacement of residents from this community due to developments that were not representing their interests. And we have grown over the years into an organization that has 9 buildings of quality, affordable housing for families of very low income. And my connection to this conversation is a result of coming into the organization in 1995 to design and direct our health programs. We have been running a training program for promotores de salud, or community health promoters, for the last 22 years, and have graduated 474 and deployed them in different areas. Nutrition, of course, is a very, very significant part of the entire comprehensive community health training that they go through. In addition to that, we have a second economic development venue, which some of you may be familiar with. It is the Medicago La Paloma, exactly due east of here. Thank you. Thank you. And that is a building that we have created as an economic development opportunities for families in this community to actually benefit from the fruits of their labors. And so we have 11 buildings, 11 businesses, including 7 restaurants, all of which are first-time family-owned businesses, except one, which is now the first-time, second-generation, first-time family-owned business. Yeah.
Good. Neelam.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me out today. Neelam Sharma. I serve as the Executive Director of Community Services Unlimited. CSU Inc. was created in 1977 by the Southern California chapter of the Black Panther Party under the national leadership of Elaine Brown and the local leadership of Kwaku Duran. I became involved because I was very active in England in various political movements, and I became one of the founders of an organization called Panther in the mid-'80s in England, through which work we met some of the remaining Panthers out here in the US, and we did some visiting with each other and some speaking engagements across the ocean. We even published a newspaper together. Eventually, I ended up moving out to South Central Los Angeles about 20 years ago, and I began to work with CSU as a volunteer. At that time, CSU was an all-volunteer organization, and post the '92 rebellion, CSU had begun to do many of the things that the party back in the day had done. So there were a lot of, thousands of bags of groceries being given away. There was a free medical screening program happening. There was the Safe Seniors program that was taking place. There were a lot of cross-cultural programs, English speaking for Spanish speakers and vice versa, that were happening out of the CSU headquarters, which were based on King Boulevard at the time. We began a dialogue around what the role of a revolutionary organization should be at a time when conditions were very different from what they were when the Panthers first existed. And so, to just put it in a nutshell, we decided that it was really, whereas the Panthers were really very much about serving the everyday needs of the people, right, pending the revolution, and doing that as a way of engaging people in making change, in becoming involved in movements, right, that really conditions were very, very different, and change was not going to happen in the way that perhaps the Panthers had perceived or conceived. And so we decided that really it was our role not so much to serve the everyday needs of people in our neighborhoods, and really neighborhoods where conditions fundamentally have not changed. And in fact, many would argue, and if you look at many stats, they've actually got worse. When you look at educational outcomes, you look at living conditions, health outcomes, and so forth, right? But we felt that it was really more our role now as revolutionaries to really think about leadership in a different way and to think about change in a different way. And to really, it was about facilitating the sharing of the knowledge that exists in our communities to become communities that were more self-sustaining, that could actually take care of ourselves and each other, and then connect with other communities doing similar things around the world. So we began to do this work about 20 years ago through doing after-school programs in South Central that drew us into doing work around food because we were really dealing with young people who were not nourished. So we began this work, and it led to a community food assessment in 2003, which is currently where all of our work has emerged from that assessment.
Thank you. Erika.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you again for allowing us to be a part of your day. My name is Erika Chesley. I am the Associate Director of Marketing and Communications with the USC Hospitality Group. The USC Hospitality Group is the official kitchen of the campus at USC. We're fueling Trojans for peak performance, whether it's in the classroom or on the athletic field, or so that we can do our jobs effectively and efficiently, is no easy task in a place that's as big as USC and to an audience that is as diverse as ours. And as such, we have grown. We've had actually tremendous growth over the years. We now operate over 40 different dining venues on campus, which include the residential dining halls, which most of you may be familiar with, or the residential dining hall service, full service restaurants, quick serve, all on the campus. And in the time that I've been here over the last 7 years, our offerings have nearly tripled. I don't want to say when I graduated from USC, but I will say that it was before the uprising. I could count the number of dining facilities on campus on just one hand. And so over this time, we have really developed, because we're more than just serving food to the students. We feel like we have an opportunity to also educate them while they're with us on things that are very important in terms of nutrition and sustainability, things that we are hoping that they will take with them, because we are, in essence, preparing the future generations that will lead our country and our world.
So one of the central issues for all of our organizations, and it may come as a surprise, it's true with USC as well, is food insecurity. And I was going to start with how have things changed since '92, but how do you perceive food insecurity right now? Erika and I'm going to let Erika start because we had this nice lunch the other day. Erika, I knew this sort of vaguely, but I didn't know it very well. And Erika's organization is thinking about creating a food pantry for USC because there are many students who are struggling to get fully nutritious. And could you talk a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the students and the faculty and the staff who are within the walls of USC are very similar to the community that lives around and outside. And we do have students who are from families where their estimated family contribution is very low. And while they may receive financial aid and funding to help to cover their expenses, there comes a time where they may be helping to support their families, or they may just not have enough. And so this is not just only here at USC. You can probably Google it and find many articles of students at UC schools, throughout the country who are dealing with food insecurity. So about 2 years ago, I was approached, and one thing that I didn't say is, in addition to handling the marketing and communications for my department, I work very closely with a lot of the student organizations and with other campus partners. And we were approached 2 years ago about this rising concern with students who were choosing, do I buy these books, or am I going to, buy groceries? Am I going to, they're feeding themselves with food that is maybe not as nutritious. They're going in, they're getting the dollar meals from McDonald's, which is, again, it's not really fueling them for peak performance. And so we're working very closely with departments to create a food bank, a food pantry on campus for those students who are food insecure. We're working on other programs that will, help the students to learn how to shop, how to cook, how to prepare food at home, which, as we all know, is less expensive than going out and purchasing food.
And so Neelam, Nancy, and Mark, at some level, that's inside USC. Outside, food security continues to be a significant issue. And food security now has taken on two different meanings, both the the simple lack of food, which was the original classic meaning of food insecurity, and then, as Erika suggests, the abundance of non-nutritious food in our communities. And so I was wondering, Neelam, if we'll go this way this time, could you talk a little bit about where you think we are, where we are around food security?
Sure. I always think in these moments about a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois in his work, The Souls of Black Folks. He has this phrase where he writes about the ways in which, diet impacted the realities, right? And he was already writing at that time about an abundance of food doesn't necessarily mean being nourished, right? Because that's what we saw happening then. And really, it's a very similar situation that has been playing out in poor communities of color in the US. And it's really, like what the sister over here was saying, is really a microscopic look at what the situation is in the community. And I said earlier that actually conditions have got worse. And if you look at and I'm not going to sit here now and give a whole spew of statistics, people can check them out for themselves. They're on our website, they're in many other places you can find them. But the reality is that diet-related illness is the #1 killer in neighborhoods like South Central Los Angeles, right? And the reality also is that since '92 and since all the promises that have been made, concretely, the availability of fresh food has not got any better as a result of anything that has systemically been done, right? So, and I refer to what Jacqueline said earlier in the panel, that if you really want to make change in a community, you kind of have to take the bull by the horns and kind of do it. And that's the history that we come from. That's our legacy. That yes, you work with everybody and you do whatever you can within structures, but ultimately the change is going to come from the bottom. And that's what really, when people are talking about a food movement in this country, I think we have to take a moment to understand that that movement was built from the bottom up. And for those of you who are interested, you should look out for books like by Orrin Hesterman. His history of the food movement in the US really, really lays that out very, very clearly, right? But so it's because of that we've been doing the work we've been doing. And you mentioned earlier, David, about Community Coalition and the work that they did immediately after the rebellion. And we really see ourselves as inheritors of that work, because when we began to ask these questions, when we were doing these after-school programs 20 years ago in South LA, and saying to ourselves, my God, our kids cannot sit still. And then having these conversations with these kids and realizing, well, they can't sit still because all they've had is sugar, sugar, and sugar all day, right? Like in one form or another, they've not actually had any nourishment, right? And so, so when we began to have these conversations and think about what to do, the first thing we did was look to see what has already been done on this issue in this neighborhood, and look at that work and look at the history of that work, and see that, like, yes, actually, some work's been done and a lot of promises have been made, but nothing's actually happened. And if you look at the history of South Central and neighborhoods like it, there's a lot of public money that goes into financing big box supermarkets and other stores to come into our neighborhoods, to get tax relief, to get public money, right, to open up stores, to be operational for a period of time, and then to close up and leave. And that is the history, if you look at what has been happening. It's happened again and again and again. And I have to say, that policymakers have got to change how they do their work. The city has got to change who it's investing in to make this change happen. With the little teeny operation that we are, we have been able to, since the assessment in 2003, building on the work of COCO and other organizations like that, we've been able to build 8 urban farms in South Central. We've been able to build a local, it's not really yet a food system, but the beginnings of a local food system where we were serving, by the end of 2015, 9,000 families with fresh food, with good fresh food, right? In addition to that, we have a catering business. We have value-added products. You know, we're selling to restaurants. We sell to one of the restaurants at the Medicago La Paloma, right? And we're building businesses, right? So, and the thing is that, like, internationally, the way that this work is being done and food is being thought about is really, really shifting. It's not about the big box supermarkets. It's not about Walmart. It's really about honing down again to the community level, to the size where entities can actually engage with people in the neighborhoods that they serve. You know, and I'll cite the example, and you guys should check it out, of the food co-op, the Mandela Food Co-op in West Oakland, where they actually just won a national award for the work they've done and the impact they've had on their neighborhood in terms of recycling dollars, in terms of creating training opportunities, and in terms of creating jobs and worker owner opportunities. So that's the kind of way we have to go, and that's the work that we are doing.
I was a proud member of the Mifflin. I was a proud member of the Mifflin Street Co-op in Madison in the 70s, and I've always believed co-ops are one of the ways that we can build from the bottom. Nancy.
I think that's an important, a very important point, because one of the bright spots we had after the rebellion of 1992 was the South Central Farmers Cooperative, 14 acres in South Central Los Angeles that was plowed over in 2006. So I agree with Neelam, there has to be a different will in terms of what South Central, the residents of South Central deserve in terms of a food system. I've applauded CSU for being able to provide farming space in very small, on much less than a 14-acre plot, which we had before, and bringing farm fresh food to schools and to the Medicago and other venues in South Central Los Angeles. I wanted to say that in addition to being food secure, the residents of South Central LA are predominantly housing insecure as well. They're all rent-burdened folks and are not struggling for things, even books, even the educational materials. They're really struggling to pay their rent. And so the fact that we have such a glut of fast food, that this is really a fast food swamp in exactly this neighborhood, that it is cheaper to buy junk every day to feed hungry children than it is to invest in a hearty stew for the week. Also considering the fact that we have very little fresh produce, fresh meat, fresh chicken in this area. And I agree with Neelam very completely that the supermarket model, which has often been used as a marker for economic stability of a neighborhood, is not the right model at all. And what we need in South LA, particularly in South Central LA, are fresh food models that are more human scaled. You don't wake up in the morning and aspire to open a supermarket. Those are very big, monopolized operations. What we need are businesses where our own people can do what they do best. We have a tremendous unemployment problem in South Central LA and a very, very gifted populace. So we need to think of different food models that allow families to develop businesses that are in their area of expertise and to benefit from serving the community with fresher foods than we can get from any of the supermarkets in this particular area.
So before you go, Mark, my next question is going to be about that evolution. But Mark and I used to work together on projects through an amazing organization, Community Health Coalition. And Community Health Councils, I'm putting them together. Community Health Councils. And one of the things, I started working with them in 1999 on food, and right away it was, how do we get supermarkets? How do we get, we actually went through this whole negotiation with supermarkets. And by 2012, when we got our last big grant, it was, how do you build an alternative food system? How do you do community gardens? How do you do urban agriculture? How do you create farmers markets? And I think it is something I want to talk about. But before we get there, Mark, or you can talk about it now.
Thank you for raising that point. So the status quo was not acceptable in '92, and the status quo is not acceptable today. And for me, there is no greater reflection of that than a 12-year life expectancy gap between neighborhoods in the city of Los Angeles. So between Bel Air and Watts, there's a 12-year life expectancy gap. I'm going to be a little bold in this comparison, but that is equal to the life expectancy gap between the United States of America and North Korea, a democracy and a militarized dictatorship. And I think that is something that we really need to reflect on during this time and think about why that is happening, what our budgets are going to, what our politicians are making decision on, because nothing is going to change and nothing will, the system will remain the same unless we strike at the core of what is driving food insecurity in Los Angeles, and that is racism and that is white supremacy. And that it comes out in decisions across the city, it comes across decisions in the county. One thing just about food security for us is also food resiliency. So looking at alternative models of where people access foods.
So can you talk a little bit about the combination?
So what we found at Community Health Councils when the few grocery stores that did exist in South LA at the time were selling purple meat and brown lettuce, and that was not acceptable. So no matter what level of engagement that could be made, quality remained an issue consistently and always. So we felt like a third way strategy needed to be developed, and that was the cultivation of a local food strategy. So whether it's a community garden that can help people's pocketbook on a day-to-day basis, or larger scale food systems through urban farms and urban food co-ops, we feel like that is vitally important to return the power and control of our food to local people and local ownership.
Okay. So I do want to talk a little bit about both facilitators or change positive and facilitators of change and the barriers that continue to exist to that change. And so I was wondering if we could turn and go the other way. What do you think? I'm not big on ones and twos because I've learned over my teaching career that people look at me and go, I only get to talk about one? And so what are some of the key facilitators for change? And what are a couple of the key barriers? And I'm going to go all the way because I think at USC, we have struggled with how much are we going to do franchises? How much are we going to do local restaurants? How much are we going to be able to reach out and get local producers and bring them into the system? So it's not, I see this as a large community issue, but I live here a lot, way too much. And this system matters to me as well. Mark.
So in terms of, so my professional career in Los Angeles has been quite short compared to my colleagues on this panel. So I've worked here for 7 years. And what I have seen in that short amount of time is an incredible amount of capacity that has built up in a very short amount of time. And so whether it's around planning or being involved in a city process or naming and framing issues around racism related to food security, there has been such a growth of power that has been incredible. And from my perspective, the rate of victories and footholds in this movement has been accelerating, which I feel like is a very good thing. I remember having conversations very early on, what is CEQA? What is an EIR? What is planning? And now we are having conversations with decision makers about budgets that are required to fund this work. We're having conversations about health equity ordinances and what does health in all policies look like. We're talking about moving from language in policy that cannot be implemented to language in policy that better be implemented or you have a problem, and through community organizing. And to me, that has been a great statement to partnership and solidarity and the work together, not only in South LA, but across the city, that is led by people of color and that must be led by people of color. One thing that I really want to put across together for my privileged white friends in the room is that we really need to practice the mantra of step up, step back during this time. And it's vitally important that the people that are impacted most by these issues are leading these issues, not only because they know them best, but because they are the ones that will be impacted by them most.
Absolutely. I wanted to go back to a word that you used in terms of franchises. I think that part of the role of community leaders in South Central LA is to resist models that are not our models being foisted upon us. When we were developing the Medicago La Paloma, for example, which has been an extremely complex project, most of our investors were very fixated on our placing an anchor franchise in the building, sort of typical of the mini mall model.
Can we wait?
Yeah.
Is there anybody in the room who doesn't know about the Mercado?
Go.
Okay.
Oh, lovely.
It's just a very brief. I teach here in the school, in the Saul Price School of Public Policy, and every semester I try and get students to go to the Mercado because it's the best food around USC. No offense.
Wait a minute now.
That's community food around USC.
Okay,
And,
I'll accept that.
And it's a remarkable thing to me how few students have ever journeyed under the freeway to the other side, to find the Mercado over there by the only reason they know the place is it's across the street from the DMV. But just a little.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think what is true of all development against the normal policy arena of developing for justice and not for what's normal is an important imperative and an important motivator for those of us. And with the Medicago La Paloma, with the insistence of putting an anchor franchise into the building, which is a typical mini mall kind of economic development concept, we turned down very much money to assert that this is a project that would rise with our labor and the labor of all of the families that were investing everything into putting their businesses into the Mercado, or it would not survive. It's never been our mission to create opportunities for franchises of any sort to take root in this community. And what is absolutely necessary is that everything be done to allow families to thrive and flourish in this community without displacement. And the Mercado La Paloma is an example of precisely that. I think that we have been a developer in this community. We are for development, but exclusively for responsible development that contributes deeply to the well-being of the people who live here. So our model for development is a better neighborhood, same neighbors policy.
Neelam.
Yeah, so I think the question was what are the challenges and what are the facilitators of change? And I would say kind of, you know, that the facilitators of change for me have always been and are the people who are going to be most served by that change. The people who really are the experts at what are the changes that are needed. Those are the biggest facilitators. Their imagination, their creativity, their hard work is always the biggest facilitator of change. And I just want to give a big up to Heather on my team and Dane on my team who are both in here. If you could both just stand up for a minute. You know, these folks have kind of... Yeah. And there's Heather there with one of the next generation. But, you know, it's a team, right? And just beyond these guys, there's a whole bunch of other people and a whole bunch of other people. And then there's everybody in the community that's out there that works with us. Those are the biggest facilitators of change. I think that the challenges really are the frame, the systemic frame that we are constantly trying to be boxed into, and all the issues that come with that. Some of those are, and very deeply, is the endemic and systemic racism that is embedded in the structural realities of the nation that we live in. It just is what it is, right? It's there. There's that. But I think it's also beyond that, because in South Central, you know, we have had elected officials. We do have elected officials who are people of color, right? That hasn't actually changed the reality on the ground in terms of the change that is being made, right? And so it becomes bigger then. It becomes about the frame and not necessarily about individual racism. But so, for example, on this issue, the policymakers and the people who control our money, public dollars, I'm not talking here about, I mean, a private investment or a private foundation can really do what they want with their money, right? Like, what can we say about that? We can protest and we can say, hey, you're not doing the best thing. But our money, public dollars, are again and again assigned to corporations and entities that have shown again and again that they do not have the commitment and the will to really tackle this issue of food, access in a community like South LA, right? So I think it becomes about this frame that there is a belief that only certain types of people and only certain types of organizations can actually make that change. It has to be people with millions of dollars in the bank. It has to be, big-time corporations, right? So that's one of the problems. And the thing that Nancy mentioned is an example of that. This kind of being pushed into a box. It's also the way then that begins to impact, this frame begins to impact policy and all the people who work within the sort of food justice movement who are all well-meaning, but who, whether we know it or not, we're affected by that frame, right? And we're affected by the way that the conversation is being directed and is being pushed. Because like in the last panel, for those of you who were here, there was this conversation about, about gentrification being, it's a cyclical thing. It happens again and again, right? And I was sitting there thinking about this and thinking, there is a cyclical thing that does happen. People do move around. They always have done. The planet, the globe, cities, even within towns, right? People are constantly moving. But gentrification is not a cyclical thing. Gentrification is something that is driven by very specific forces and driven in a very specific way for the profit of certain companies. So we have to be very clear about that, right? And so the frame, right, that we exist in affects everybody who's within that movement. And what begins to happen is, and this is why it's really important that you really thoroughly look at the history of this movement and what has been going on and where we are now, is that, we can look at movements in the past 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and write a historical piece or read a historical piece about how that movement got bought out, right? How that movement got co-opted. But it's very difficult to see that happening when you're in the midst of it. And what I would say is that movements are constantly being co-opted because of the frame, not because anybody is necessarily there doing it, there's a spy who's being paid, or it's not necessarily that nefarious, right? But because of the way that the power structure controls the frame constantly, right? And so that's what I would say is the biggest challenge. So for example, in the work that we do, I mentioned earlier some of the things we've been able to do, but we've also been able to recently purchase in July 2015, excuse me once, we purchased a 10,000 square foot lot in South LA to turn it into a food hub, to turn it into a 7-day-a-week market, because we do, for those of you who don't know, we do weekly pop-ups, we sell to chefs, we do a CSA program. This is how we make, we affect those 9,000 families, right? But 9,000 families is like a drop in the bucket in a neighborhood like South LA, right? We want to affect hundreds of thousands of families. So we need to build our capacity to do that because nobody else is doing it, right? And so we bought this 10,000 square foot lot, a little teeny, and I'm going to tell you, we don't even at this point have $1 million budget annually. It's just underneath that, right? Yet we've been able to do this. We're currently in a $2 million fundraising campaign, right, to both do the construction and to do some of the operation that we need. And yet, do you know what? All the lip service that all the foundations and all the academics and all the people involved in this food justice movement pay to this issue, it's like walking through molasses raising this money, doing this work, right? Because we're not a certain type of organization, because we don't have millions of dollars in the bank, because we're not a corporation. And the fact that we have years and years, 10 years of expertise and practice in building a social enterprise, in building a business around food, the fact that we don't owe anybody money, the fact that we've delivered on every single thing we said we're going to do, doesn't seem to mean anything to the folks that control the public purse. So again, we have to shift the way that people are doing business and the way that change is perceived to happen, because it happens from the grassroots. That's where it happens from. And so, so I think the challenges are the box and the frame, and the facilitators of change are the people, and always have been, and always will be.
Mark would just like to, before we go, Erika, Mark was hoping to just respond.
Go right ahead.
I just wanted to respond to Neelam. Thank you for bringing up co-optation. I think that's vitally important, and I know we're going to be talking to threats, but equity can be easily co-opted, and I think over the past 7 years there's a great risk of that. The conversations on health equity, we've done a great job talking about what health equity means, and the frame has changed to the point where the people that we are advocating to are talking about health equity back to us in a very different way that is not health equity. And I think we need to get very real on how do we develop strategies to enforce health equity. The other thing that I just want to mention very quickly, and again I apologize, is this idea that there should be a limited amount of resources. I think we need to be very clear that in a time of unprecedented wealth and development in this city, that there are not enough resources to devote to people's health and how long they live is a manufactured crisis. And we cannot be fighting over crumbs for this work, and we need to be redirecting and directing our energy to expanding that box ever and ever so it's greater and greater. So I just feel like I need to.
Erika.
So I'd like to circle back on the topic of franchises and their presence in our community. Over the last 7 years, we've been very intentional with reducing the number of franchise partners that we have on campus so that we could increase the number of self-developed concepts. We have a 15 experience principle food philosophy that really drives everything that we do relative to food and beverage at USC, from purchasing to how menus are developed, to the reduction of red meat, to using less sugar, being very transparent with our menus, and having chef-driven options for our students. And one of the results of that is most of you may have parked in the parking structure here behind the hotel. And if you looked out, you saw in the back of the hotel there's a garden that's got about 60 vertical towers. Those are our towers. We use the produce from them to support the full-service restaurants here at USC. So the Lab Gastropub, Morton Fig, and McKay's here at the hotel all use the produce from that farm, which is great because it really helps us to reduce the carbon footprint that otherwise we would have had from ordering ordering produce from the outside. This allows our chefs really to be very creative and, again, very intentional with how they're preparing food for their Trojan family. Another thing that I wanted to mention is we do have a farmers market that's on campus that's available to our students and anyone that should happen to come on, that gives them access to fresh fruit, produce, healthy snacks, and of course hot food. I'm sure that you all are familiar with the big USC Village that's going to be opening here in the fall. And the university has been very intentional again with selecting what will go there in terms of the food retail space. They're not known chains or known franchises. It's a lot of startup, owner-occupied businesses that will be going there in the food space. There will be groceries available with Trader Joe's and also with Target. It's going to be a Target Express that will have fruits and vegetables. So again, just trying to, our intent is to bring things closer for the students, but at the end of the day, it does impact and it helps the community as well.
I was wondering if we could go a little bit more into this movement and how the movement has, I got to tell you, you listen to Erika and USC growing its own food. I've been here long enough, that's like, USC's growing its own food. Come on, how did that happen? And so in some sense, there is this change. Neelam has so beautifully, that frame creates these barriers to change. But within that frame, there's also this grassroots sort of demand for change, and that it's affected large institutions to community institutions. I was wondering if you could talk about one example that you know of where we've seen that kind of change, either from your organization, how it has grown and developed and matured through this 25 years of change.
I think like Neelam's organization, our promotores have also been very, very active in...
Could you talk a little bit more about the promotores for the people?
Yes, I'm sorry, thank you very much. The promotores de salud are community members who come to our organization to participate in a intensive community health leadership program. It's a 6-month program followed by a potential 6-month internship in an ally organization to learn practically how to apply principles learned of health rights and the particular topics of interest. We've been training these folks in this way for the last 22 years and have developed health initiatives of our own that are advancing in particular ways. But as it relates to nutrition, promotores have been very focused on training folks about nutrition in all of the, and various chronic diseases as it relates to food consumption and healthy eating. And have been very frustrated by the fact that the food environment in which they're teaching folks has not been helpful in providing people what they know they need to consume. And so from that initiative, they have also become farmers in small plots. The Medicago itself has a tiny kitchen garden that serves that, but we've also built gardens in almost all of our own housing developments and in 2 pocket parks that we help to develop as well, because there's an increasing need for people to grow what they need to eat, both economically and also nutritionally. I think the work also that I've seen Neelam do in training even young kids around nutritional concepts and what is healthy to eat, that and also a growing interest and capacity among collaborative organizations in training community members about land use and planning and zoning and how to be at the table when land use discussions that will impact their very existence are at the table and how to make a place at that table. All of these things are contributing to creating a healthy environment that includes the kind of access to foods that people feel and now know very deeply that they that are best for feeding their own families.
It's an intriguing thing. Professor LaVonna Lewis and I have been working on this issue since the 90s. And one of the things that struck me about one of the changes was at the beginning, it was about how do we get supermarkets, as I said. But one of the most significant changes has been the community organizations' savvy expertise and growing knowledge about how the processes of urban planning, of development. I mean, I remember not that, like 15 years ago, sitting in a room where the county person who oversaw the farmers markets was talking about EIRs, and this very, very, very amazing woman, Lark Galloway Gilliam, looked at me and went, "What is he talking about?" 5 years later, she could sit in a room with a group of planners and say, "This is what your EIR should say." Right. And so, I think that's a remarkable shift from how we look at food becomes this lens into this larger world, like housing in many ways has been that lens. Neelam.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that, despite all of my comments about the frame and co-option and all of those dangers, there's definitely been a sea change, on the ground. And again, I just want to emphasize that has come from the bottom up. And just as an example, I mean, we've seen more than 500 young people in South Central go through our From the Ground Up program, a very rigorous, Nancy mentioned it, training program that not everyone survives, right? And is really actually quite difficult to get into when we offer it. So we've seen that, and we've seen the way that doing this work in a neighborhood over a consistent period of time has really kind of created that change. So what we're seeing now as we're building this food hub is folks who want to create food-related businesses. And we've been seeing this change happening for some time, right? Not, not just any old food business, but people who want to set up a vegan catering business, folks who are doing kind of backyard brewing, right, with organically grown hops. People who really, who want to, like we're currently in the process of setting up a network of urban growers, and we've been doing this work now for years to get to this point in South Central, who we can purchase food from as part of our food hub, in addition to supporting local regional farmers, right? So we're definitely seeing that change happening in the neighborhood that we serve a lot, right? But I would still say, and I just have to say this, that I do think that on a bigger level, there is this kind of bubble that is created, this pretty bubble that's created around this kind of stuff by the folks who are kind of the ones who direct and create the bigger kind of stories and language around these food issues that really don't reflect reality. So there's a lot of talk about the policy changes and what have you that have happened that are awesome, every single one of them, and I'll say that we began this food work as an organization with policy work. We were the founders of the Healthy School Food Coalition that made the first soda ban, the cafeteria reform motions that came after that. Myself and Heather were part of the California Food Justice Coalition. We were part of the precursor to the current Food Policy Council, right? So have been involved and still support those kinds of policy changes. But I have to be honest with you that those policy changes often affect the neighborhoods where there's already stuff happening, and they don't get down to neighborhoods like South Central. And really, in our neighborhoods, you have to make that change from the ground. It's got to come from the ground up. And if folks are not actively engaged and promoting and part of that policy change, it doesn't mean anything. And we saw that with the soda ban. So that's why we went back to building this model on a long-term basis of change, and so again, just reflecting that yes, there is a sea change has happened, but there's a lot more to do, and we do have to keep our eye on the bigger picture and this bubble, like I speak of, which looks very pretty and has lots of bells and whistles, but there's often no substance behind it.
Yeah. When Lavana and I, along with a really great doctoral student, Bryce Lowry, did this nice study of farmers markets, one of the things that's going to save the food system, we discovered that they indeed are robust, but not so much in the communities that need them most.
And many of them have closed. They were opened like that, and they've closed.
So what we'd like to do now is to ask you to ask us questions. There's going to be mics, I believe, people walking around. If you'll raise your hands if you have a question, we can answer that. And if you don't, I can keep going. I'm a professor. I can ask questions forever. But I figured maybe you have a question over here at the table. And I would ask that you keep your questions relatively brief because we want to get to as many people, and respectful, of course.
I'll try. I'm just kidding.
And introduce, could you, I'm sorry, I really apologize. Could you just introduce yourself?
Sure. First of all, thank you all for being here. My name is Yvonne Rodriguez. I am a USC staff student, and I live less than a mile just south of here. So I'm also a community member. And so I really, really applaud you all for being so honest and generous with what you shared. And I do see that there is this need, this constant need for spaces that are able to provide healthy food for my growing family. So I'm raising my kids in the neighborhood that I grew up on. And I notice that these shelves with healthy items are bare, right? So I want to ask if this village that also belongs to this community, are any of these awesome organizations that are being represented on the stage, are they going to be part of this new village for healthy options for families that live here too?
Great question.
Good question.
It was bound to happen, Erika.
Yeah. Well, So, you know, there are still spaces available at the USC Village, and you know, they are in the process of filling up the spaces. They are, you know, available to anyone who is coming in and is interested in you know, leasing them. I don't know if any of those who are here today have looked into that, or if it's even come up. I know that USC Real Estate is being very intentional, or trying to be very intentional, in selecting leasees who will come in and provide not only for the student community, but also for, you know, the community as a whole. And they have assembled a very diverse group of tenants that will be there. But outside of that, I don't have any other information at this time.
Someone up over here. There's a couple questions.
Good morning. My name is Margaret Peters, and I am a 40-year resident of South LA. I'm also part of the South LA Alliance of Neighborhood Councils. I think I heard someone say that USC is producing their own food, and I was interested in the panel's take on the concept of urban farming. And do you see it as a viable option to addressing South LA's food desert, you know, in terms of maybe producing our own food in our food desert? Thank you.
So I'll take that one. First of all, big believer in the South LA Alliance of Neighborhood Councils. I've been to a few of those late night meetings and appreciate the work that you're doing. In terms of food farming and local food production being viable in South LA, I think you've seen examples of it working very, very well here. From our perspective as an urban land trust, our focus is on community gardens. So our scale in terms of food production is less, and we focus more time on the other kind of social cohesion benefits of youth development, of providing a safe place for people to be outdoors, a place for, you know, families to be together and have barbecues. And I think sometimes that is missed in the research on urban greening. And it's something that we should evaluate in how we are directing dollars, that it's not just about the tonnage of food that is produced. It is what are the other impacts? What happens when you take down a fence and replace a vacant lot with a garden? Mm-hmm. Does the community get more walkable? Yes. Does it get more safe? Yes. So it's a great question, and encourage others to.
Neelam, could you tell us where your food hub is going to be?
It's a building that's been called the Paul Robeson Center for the last 40 or so years on Vermont and 66th. And we intend to keep that great name. For those who don't know who Paul Robeson is, please do your research. Everybody should know who this man is, or was, rather. And we are going to call it the Paul Robeson Community Wellness Center. Mm-hmm. And we will actually be adding an urban farm into that space in addition to the one that we currently operate and the others that we built. I do think urban farming is a very, very viable option to grow food. You know, you look at somewhere like Cuba, they have absolutely transformed their access to fresh food based on their urban growing. I was lucky enough to be in Geneva in Switzerland a few years ago, and I saw that like almost every single patch of land, even kind of little spaces like in the middle of roundabouts, you know, they were growing grapes. You know, and they had, and as part of their winemaking, they're using every single piece of land to do that. When I was in Zimbabwe, I saw that every single piece of land that was available to folk, they were growing greens and what have you in those areas. So we should be using our land, our urban land, far more productively than to be growing grass. So, you know, definitely it's very viable. But at the same time, we're also about, we don't see it replacing farmers. And so we're very much about supporting small family farmers. We purchase regularly from about 20 farming families, mostly of color, I think almost exclusively farmers of color. You know, not those farmers who supply all the restaurants on the west side, but a whole other slew of farmers who we intentionally support. And so it's not to replace that, it's as an adjunct to that.
I think we have another over here, and then we have one here. Oh, sorry. I'm not in control. That's a good thing.
Hi, I'm Mia with First 5 LA, and I just had one comment for Erika from USC around the students who are food insecure. I know you probably don't have an answer to this, but it almost feels like a Band-Aid. When a school costs $60,000 a year, you're going to have, I don't know, the focus should be on reducing tuition first and foremost, the cost of it across the country. But that's just one comment. The other thing I wanted to ask is, as you are doing this work, how are you making sure that as you bring or you work towards having more healthier options, that you're hanging on to food that is culturally appropriate and culturally viable for those communities?
That's a great question. So, within the 40 different venues that we have on campus, the cuisine is all very diverse. We have a self-developed concept that is serving food that is Spanish-inspired. We have a cafe that is Asian fusion. We have in our Tudor Cafe, which is located in with the Tudor School of Engineering, we have various international cuisine, Asian-infused, Indian. So we really look at our student population. We do surveys with them to find out what they're looking for, and we really try to provide cuisine that is authentic within those parameters. Our residential dining halls, which we have 3 on campus, are all you care to eat options for the students who are on meal plans. It's also open to the students students, faculty, and staff who are not on meal plan. And again, we have very diverse menus that follow several different cuisines.
And I do think it's an important thing to know. It's someone who's working with high school in East Los Angeles to try and get people to apply to USC. There's an extraordinary number of people who go to USC who don't pay full tuition. Indeed, there's a lot of people who pay very relatively small amount of tuition so that we can have as diverse a student population. What happens to them when they get here is the university is actually very much wants them to come and tries to bring them here. But for many of them, the struggle is that living within this circumstance is hard. And so it's not the tuition that is actually the problem for most of them. It's that that many of the people around them have a lot of money, and that many of the resources that other people have, they don't have. And this is why Erika and I talked about this the other day. We have a very substantial, and have had since I got here, very substantial number of people who are from communities of marginalized communities within our underserved communities, within our surrounding areas. And they struggle sometimes. And the university has begun over the years to respond to this in various ways, sometimes successfully, sometimes not as much. Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you again. It's been wonderful to hear you all. My name is Yvonne. I'm a first-year student in the department, first-year PhD student in the Department of American Studies and Ethnicity here on campus. And my question is maybe more focused towards Neelam, your point towards the end. You mentioned the California Food Justice Coalition as being a precursor to the LA Food Policy Council, and then earlier on just talking about how policymakers really have to change their work. And so I just wanted to ask about the role of the LA Food Policy Council, maybe what it looks like in your different areas, and supporting, food justice initiatives and policies.
Okay. So actually, just to be clear, it was the LA Food Justice Network that was the precursor to the LA Food Policy Council. That was another statewide coalition that we were part of. I think that in a movement, and this is something the Black Panthers understood very well, and they were really the creators of the idea of rainbow coalitions and so forth, right? And really understanding that every methodology and everybody has a place in a movement. So things like food policy councils have their place and play a very, very important role. Now, if you look at food policy councils around the country, they're very, very different. They're not, homogeneous bodies by any means, right? And so, in some parts of the country, a food policy council is really a body that exists entirely outside of government. Is just kind of like, and that is really what the LA Food Justice Network was. It was a gathering of food justice activists who came together themselves off their own kind of there was nothing funding it, and we kind of created this network of people around the city and actually wrote white papers on policy, many of the things that preceded what the Food Policy Council now does, right? And so there are food policy councils that exist like that around the country. The LA Food Policy Council, and then there are those that are really entirely embedded in government, that are created by the local city government, that are funded by the local city government. I think that the LA Food Policy Council sits somewhere in the middle. It is housed at, at the town hall. It gets some money through the town hall, through, for its offices and so forth. And so like it has its place. We have been involved in different things that the LA Food Policy Council has done. I dare say we will be again. That is not our major, I spoke earlier about many of the policy type work that we were involved in that kind of led us to all the work we currently do. But really for us, we kind of stepped back from that and we decided that we wanted to work in a very kind of targeted, long-term way in the neighborhood we serve to build a model for change, right? Because you can policy till you're blue in the teeth, but if there aren't models emerging as to what that change can look like, then policy kind of, like I said, policy very often ends up affecting and impacting those neighborhoods where change is already happening and not places like South Central. So.
I just wanted to say something, just to grab onto this, the importance of sustainability. One of the things that happened after the rebellion was just the glut of spending that was not sustainable, that just dissipated and left a very, very bitter taste in the mouth of many folks who are residents of South Central Los Angeles, South LA in general. That I think part of the change is for organizations that are really trying to dig very, very deep and sustainable roots, because doing something that is a fly-by-night project is not healthy or respectful for our community.
Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about the Food Policy Council, or are you good? Okay. Someone else over there? Actually, sir, right here, yes. Let's come. This gentleman was waiting a long time. I'm sorry, Mary.
Quickie question here. First of all, thank all of you for showing up today. In terms of grassroots organizational stuff and groups that you all are involved with, we went to a reception last night and heard that there were 850 churches in South Central LA. Are you all working with the churches? Are they doing anything for you or helping you, or have you all reached out to them? Or is that something that doesn't happen here?
No. It happens.
It does happen a great deal. I think that for many of us, what has happened in the process of gentrification and displacement and population moves is that almost all of our surrounding churches are now commuter churches. And commuter churches. So folks come in now from outside of South LA to go to church, because the church is still precious and valued and a core of spiritual life. But in terms of organizing the people who live here, less and less we're finding are people who are of the local congregations.
And I'll just share quickly, we've been based for the last few years at the Universalist, what is the name? Why can I not remember?
The Universalist Church.
The Universalist Church based right here on campus, out of their commercial kitchen. And so there are partnerships. But they've faced a similar thing actually, where they were the last kind of remaining entity that owned land independently of USC, and they've just been bought by USC. And I definitely have some things I want to say about that. Not in this moment. But
if we could wait on that.
Yes.
Only because I want to get the other.
I'll just say very quickly that we've developed 25 parks and gardens throughout LA County, and each one of those projects have, the local neighborhood church, or more frequently, the local 5 neighborhood churches that are very close. So most of our meetings at project sites actually take place at the churches, and we have, they've been very accommodating and also very, very with us on some key policy and project agendas.
And I've been. I ask the question quickly is that I grew up, I'm 74 years old, I grew up in Chicago. Churches were the place you went for everything you needed.
Yeah.
Everything you need church.
Sure.
And I don't go to church anymore, so I don't know.
Well, that's the problem.
And nor does anybody else.
We're going to go to Mary.
Anybody,
We're going to hang on one second, because I cut Mary off. We're going to go to Mary, and then we have one more question over here, and that's the last one. I'm sorry.
Thank you, David, and thank you all panelists for being here. My name is Mary Peralta, and I'm staff member at the Price School as well. First of all, it is somewhat surprising that you mentioned that there's students who are food secure, because really there's no shy student when it comes to getting some free food during all our events. But having said that, we waste, USC, every department in this university throws away just pounds and pounds and pounds of food. It's heartbreaking. I have tried, I've called banks, I've tried, and nobody wants to come on campus. Number one, the access is denied to most of those people, and I'm assuming there's a liability issue. But it would seem to me that somehow, maybe, especially with these groups, and Erika, I believe it is, maybe in some way there can be a ready-made food pantry that we can send this food to at one corner of USC, so that we can give this food away, whether it's to students who have been identified as food insecure, and or to, of course, you know, the neighbors and the community.
Right.
How many people here have thrown away pans of food every day from events, morning meetings, lunch meetings, evening meetings? It goes on and on. It really is shameful.
Erika, I want to get to, we're almost out of time. And so, brief so I can get that last question. That's all.
Okay.
Brief answer so I, no,
okay.
Please.
So with USC Hospitality, Mary, right? We do work with an organization that's called Chefs to End Hunger. So when we do have, you know, and our chefs are tasked to, you know, to only produce what's needed, but we all know that sometimes that doesn't happen because maybe not as many people will come or whatever happens. So we have an agreement with Chefs to End Hunger, which is through a partnership with LA Specialty, which is one of our food providers. And so when we do have food that's left over, Chefs to End Hunger picks the food up from campus, they take it to the local food bank, and most of it is used down at the LA Mission. So it's used within a very close proximity of the campus. I would love to connect with you afterwards. If you know, once our pantry is up and running, we will be looking for sources. And in the instance where we do have food that has not exceeded the safe zone, then we would absolutely want to be able to put that into the pantry and be able to use it for those who are in need.
Okay. We'll take whatever's left over to compost.
Hello, everyone.
Very brief, please.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. So I am a plant-based lifestyle coach, and I'm a youth campaign assistant at PETA. And my question for you guys all was, I lived in LA my entire life. I'm 25, I was born in '92, and I've never seen anyone do plant-based outreach in my community. And I hear that you guys are all opening or starting these community gardens, but most people don't know how to cook the veggies in their garden. So I just wanted to know what programs do you guys provide to give information on how to transform these ingredients that you want people to eat more of?
It's an excellent question.
That's a great question.
So we
right there on the that's the same
I don't know.
Very cool. So we have a training center at Fremont High School, which is on 76 and Avalon. And over the past 5 years, we've graduated about 500 students from the program, and it's strictly plant-based education. We do afternoon and evening meals for the students because most of them are throwing their LAUSD provided lunches straight into the compost bin rather than eat what is given to them. So would love to connect with you on that. We do organizing around about 1 mile to 2 miles around the campus, and would love to connect.
We have a free class once a month, 3 hours, gardening, nutrition, growing food, picking it, cooking right out of the garden. The second Saturday of every month. The next one's coming up. So the guy behind you, he's one of our staff. He can give you details. Yeah, and that's embedded in everything we do, plant-based education, yeah.
So thank you for your questions. Thank you to the panel. Aren't they amazing?